Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Do's and don'ts of exhibition interpretation is a really funny one, because what is one museum's do can be another museum's complete don't. It depends so much on the context and on the setup. What you're going to see in this video is a lot of photo examples from a small local museum that I recently visited. And what I love about using smaller local museums as examples or case studies is that very often they have limited resources, so they have to be very creative in the way they go about updating their exhibitions or adding to existing exhibitions. Very often they don't have a particularly big budget, they won't have a lot of hands and heads, they have limited time and so on. So they very often have to do a little bit at a time with existing exhibitions, where they might sometimes face some very outdated pieces of interpretation. So they really have to think creatively around what new they might put in, but also around what they have that is already useful or could potentially be turned into something completely different. And as always, I would be really interested in hearing about your thoughts, your perspectives. If you have any examples, please do share them below. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. So let's dive into some examples. Let's start with a well-known one, text-heavy exhibition panels. Now have a look at this photo. There's so much text here, and some of it very small, some of it is up very high. It's barely possible to see all the way up there if you're not very tall like me. Some of it very low, some of it in the dark, and there is an awful lot of it. You barely know where to start here. Another text mistake is your text position. Now in this photo you have a display case with some silverware, and there are tiny little numbers next to the objects, and then you have number 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on the panel up very high, and again small text size. It's barely readable, and it takes you out of context because you have to look at the text, step back, see if you can look all the way up and find the text, and then back to the object that you've been reading about and finding that, refinding that in the display case. Not a particularly good position to put your audience in. A really interesting do is your text and how you word it. The more active, the more captivating you can make your descriptions, the better. If you have a quick look at the example to the left here, about navigation, take notes, make sketches, preserve specimens, make measurements and so on. Very short, direct, active sentences, very engaging from the start. The example to the right is a good one as well. It's almost like reading a novel, very dramatic. The ship, the weather, the crew is sick with scurvy, their gums bleed, their teeth fall out, the crew reaches a stretch of coastline. It's almost like reading, a drama. And it's a very good way of getting your audiences, your readers captivated from the very beginning. So active words, captivating sentences. Even if you don't have that many resources or a big budget, it's very easy to set the right atmosphere with small means. Now, the image to the left here, you have panels with some drawings and images and a few benches and with display cases beneath them. And a few pieces of fur just sort of laid out to create a bit of an atmosphere. Very simple, but very easily done. The picture to the right, about setting a sort of harbor atmosphere. You have a lot of rope there, you have some barrels. Again, very simple, very easy. It's not a huge thing, but it does set the atmosphere when you enter a room, and you kind of immediately have an idea about what is this room about and what's it meant to do. This one is another good example as well. You have a compass there, navigation board, table in the middle, and then some globes in different sizes light up just above it. It's very captivating once you enter a room to see a lot of light like this, and you kind of understand immediately what this is about. Another major don't. Have a look at this photo. These are axes from different prehistoric ages, and of course the entire idea is to try and display and show the development in axes, the techniques, the material used and so on. And it's just too much. A lot of museums do this, I believe. It's such an overwhelm that you barely know where to start. And I don't know if you can just spot it to the very far right there in the photo. There is a rather large panel as well with some drawings of the different axes and their development and quite a bit of text again. And it's fair enough if you are studying archaeology and you're really interested in these kind of things, but the majority of audiences or visitors are not going to be, and it's just too much and too overwhelming to even try and go into this. Do create some sort of transformation, almost like a portal. This is a fantastic example. You come up a staircase and you have this huge wall of like grass and moss and an arch you have to walk through. It's a wonderful way of going from something, the outer world, and into another world and another experience. And you know immediately what you're meant to do, you know where you're meant to go. It's a wonderful atmosphere, a wonderful setting to do. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to require a lot of means or budget to put something like this up. Let us hear the voices of the experts. This is such a wonderful little way of doing it. You have different faces there of archaeologists, and they tell about their favorite finding, and you see them there in the display case just below the faces. You can do this digitally, of course, as well. If you don't have the budget for that, this is a very simple little way of doing it. Let's hear the experts. It's almost always fascinating to hear people who are really fascinated and passionate about what they do tell their story and tell about their work. And it makes it personal as well. There is a little bit of a relation there between the visitor and the experts when you actually get to see and hear them. This is a really fun way of showing off your work. This is a little display again of archaeological boots and shoes. And if you go up close, you can see just how muddy and dirty they are. And it's a fun way of actually showing off your work, but also telling the story behind what is required here and what does it actually look like to be on an archaeological excavation. And what does it involve and so on. So a great and fun way of actually showing off some of your work material, but also how that work is actually carried out. Create some exploration. Again, this doesn't have to be massive, but these are tiny little cupboards that you open and discover an object in each. And you can create sort of treasure hunts around this. You can create surveys, questionnaires and so on that you can use for schools and for students walking around your museum. And it's just a great way of creating a little bit of anticipation, a little bit of discovering and exploring the objects and the collections for yourself. And now a massive don't. I think a lot of museums are guilty in this one. You have a display case there, and then you have these drawers below the display case with lots of text. Yeah, they've tried to make up for it a bit by putting in some images and some maps and so on, but look at all that text. And again, some of it small sizes, some of it you have to read almost sitting on the floor because it's the lowest drawer in this panel. And I know it's a tempting way of trying to put in more information, but it's just too much and no one is going to read this. So just be careful not to overdo it on the text front, because this is a display that really belongs 20, 30 years ago. Don't bombard people with information. This was just one of, I think, 4 or 5 different panels. Look at how much is going on here. In the middle there, I don't know if you can spot it, with a sort of white line going through. That's meant to be a timeline, and you can see some years below that. And then you have all this text, these bubbles and squares of text and photos and maps and images, and you barely know where to start. There's a lot going on here, and there is nothing really that's highlighted either. So if there were like specifically important years or events in this story that you should be aware of, there's no way of finding them in all this chaos and all this mess, unless you want to go through all of it and read all of it, which is a lot. This is very hard to get your head around and to follow a storyline through something this massive. Do be playful. Again, this is not something that has to require a lot of resources. Create tiny little challenges. You can see a pair of binoculars there. Again, a very easy thing for students to do, to play around with themselves if they want to do that. And just a panel explaining what this is all about, how to go about it. It's something families can do as well with relatively young children, and it just creates a little bit of fun and playfulness. So just to sum up a little bit, do use captivating, active words in your text and in your descriptions. Set the atmosphere. It doesn't have to involve a lot of setup or design. You could do it in fairly simple ways, but it just creates a little bit extra in a room. If you can create some sort of transformation or portal almost to and from the outer world where visitors come from and into your world, it's a fantastic way of really setting the scene as well. Don't forget the professional voices. People really want to hear professionals talk about something they're passionate about and something they know something about. Create a bit of exploration. Let us try out for ourselves. Be playful. Set a challenge around it. It's always really fun. Don't be too text heavy. I know it's a tempting thing to be when you have a lot to say, but really try and mix up the way you get your information across, because you end up overwhelming people. If I have to read everything, try and mix it up. Let me listen to some of it, or make me try some of it for myself. Use smell, whatever you can to activate the different senses. Don't be too text heavy. Think about how you position the text as well. It has to be readable, not too high, not too low. Be careful with satiation, and not too many of the same objects. It just becomes boring unless you happen to be particularly interested in stone axes or something. It's just not that fun for most people. Don't make exploring boring. Try and mix it up a bit. Try and make it something that I could do for myself and something that I want to do. Make it engaging, make it fun, make it playful. Also, don't be afraid to make fun of yourself sometimes. A wonderful example is that display with the archaeological boots and shoes there with all the mud and everything. It really, really paints the picture, I thought. So a wonderful way of being fun and having a bit of fun with some of your own material, but also at the same time, let people know what it actually involves going on an archaeological excavation. Don't bombard with too much information. Again, it's just overwhelm and it tires people. And never be afraid to experiment with what you've got. A lot of the time, it's not really about having a lot of resources or a big budget or anything like that. It's about being creative with what you have. And there's so many ways you can turn don'ts into really, really fun, creative, inspirational do's.
Do you have any good examples of do's and don'ts? And if you have, what made a do, and a don't? Would a don't have worked in a different context with a different setup and so on? Very often it's the tiny little details that actually determine whether or not something is working in an interpretation context. So please do share your thoughts on this.